Okay, whatever you want.
Oh, I don't care.
Okay. Dr. Paul Wouters is the director of the Center for Science and Technology Studies, CWTS, from Leiden University in the Netherlands. The title of his lecture is New Generation Metrics. Dr. Wouters, whenever you like or whatever you like.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for this very nice invitation. I'm very happy to be able to share with you to share with you how we at the Center for Science and Technology Studies in Leiden think about the problem of evaluation. We are a center which is having a variety of missions. Our new research program is called Valuing Science and Scholarship, and we designed it because we think that evaluation of research is very important in determining the possibilities for new generations of researchers to do their work. It's very important in shaping the conditions in terms of infrastructure and resources for research and scholarship. And in a society in which evaluation and assessment of all sectors are playing important roles, it's increasingly important that assessment is not driven by those dimensions that are easily measurable, or are only driven by those aspects of scientific research which are most profitable or economically most effective. If we want to develop a society in which knowledge and scholarship in the broad sense, including the arts and humanities, help to play a role in improving the relationships in society, then we need to make sure that the assessment and evaluation of research is not one-dimensional, and that it does include performance. It is important that better performance is rewarded, but performance needs to be defined in a broad sense and not be limited to only those things that happen to sit in the databases. And as you perhaps know, we have a lot of databases. We love data. We play with them, we make beautiful maps of science, but we think these are instruments and should not turn into goals. So this is the background and the basic philosophy we have. This is also the motivation why we think it's important to pay a lot of attention to the quality of research assessment and evaluation. And in the first part of my talk, I will give a brief overview of some important considerations and principles for proper assessment and proper evaluation. But in the second part, and I hope we'll have time for that, I'll try to share with you some experiments that we are developing, because we think it's important to go away from the currently dominant models, which are either power-based or only metrics-based, but that we make interesting and inspiring new models. And the basic point, actually, so if we don't have any time, this is the most important message. Our basic goal is to reintroduce a firm link between evaluation and the creation of new knowledge. It has become too separated. And the basic goal we have is to reintegrate evaluation and assessment in the process of knowledge creation, so that it also becomes interesting, intellectually interesting and inspiring to be involved in evaluation. So because it's no longer an administrative formal procedure which stands apart from doing research and doing the basic creative work. That's the challenge. Valuing science and scholarship, what does it mean? It's clear because of the developments in scientific research and in the scientific system that we have a lot of need for more information about research. It's no longer possible to do world level, high level research without having a lot of information about research. It's no longer enough to just read your books and journals in your own field. You need to develop more and process more information. We want to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches, which is an important challenge. It's not always easy, but it's imperative, I think. And we want to develop a richer variety of evaluation practices. So this means new forms of evaluation, new performance criteria, and new indicators. Important element, indicators should always be put into context. The danger of indicators is they easily travel, and they easily travel from a government to the individual researcher. Not so easy the other way around. It is important, if people use indicators, that they are put into the context in which they may be useful. To support this, we published a number of papers about principles for research assessment. This is the Leiden Manifesto, published in 2015 in Nature, which was a call from the scientometric and informametric community to all researchers and all managers to take care of a responsible application of metrics in research evaluation, and to not lead the metrics lead the research assessments. And it's also a call for evaluation in the sense of allowing researchers who are being evaluated to look into that procedure, to make evaluation transparent and itself accountable to the users, and also to make evaluations, to organize them in such a way that diversity in research is being promoted, both in terms of gender relationships and in terms of other cultural dimensions in which diversity is important. Because we strongly believe, which is not completely proven perhaps, but we strongly believe that a diverse research workforce creates a more diverse and interesting knowledge base. Responsible metrics is an attempt to coin a term that relates to the European concepts of responsible research and innovation, and extends it to the idea of coupling that with assessment, which, and Gunnar will talk about that, is not so easily reconcilable, and in some ways they are contradictory. We think that it is important that the research assessment procedures are being put in place that promote research, responsible research and innovation, and not hinder the development of socially accountable research. This includes, and this is an important point for everybody who has the task part-time or full-time, to play a role as the manager of research processes in universities. We must be keenly aware that all assessment procedures and all evaluations will always have a reflexive effect. If you set certain targets for researchers to perform, usually they are quite able to meet them, but it does have effects on the conditions for research creation. So you must have an awareness of this reflexive feedback loops that are created in society when you introduce evaluation indicators and evaluation goals. So this means that it's never enough to be, so for example, it means that installing a perfect information system is not the solution. It may be in some ways helpful to improve information systems, but they by themselves will not solve the complicated problem of research evaluation. It also means that you can't have systems that are too rigid or too encompassing. For example, one system for a whole complicated country might be not so very wise. It might be better to develop modular interactive systems that can talk with each other and that are responsive to developments in research and in society in general that will trigger changes, that necessitate change in the evaluation process. So this is the meaning of the principle of reflexivity, to make accounting accountable, to make research assessment also responsible. This is the reason why we think this is important to realize that measuring is changing. As soon as we measure societal aspects, we are changing those social processes that produce the outcomes that are being measured. With respect to research evaluation, I would like to emphasize that in our view, the quality of research and the impact of research are container concepts. Of course, research work, either a publication or a process or an invention or a movie that's the result of scientific research, has many qualities. They may be statistically sound, they may be well written, they may be a good performance in terms of the aesthetics. These different qualities are very important. But as soon as we start to talk about the quality as a general concept of research, we are basically translating those interesting attributes and qualities of research into one container concept, which is basically a concept related to the measurement system, to the evaluation system. So we are translating attributes of scientific research from the domain of knowledge creation into a unified concept in the domain of knowledge assessment and knowledge evaluation. And that's a translation that is not unproblematic. Because as soon as you start to do this, you make certain attributes and aspects of research invisible, inevitably, in the evaluation system. And you must be aware of that. So this is the reason why it's important to realize that actually a thing like quality of research as such doesn't exist. It only exists in the context of the research assessment system. The same with impact. Impact of research on society as such doesn't exist. What exists are interactions between researchers, people often, robots sometimes, and other societal actors and sectors, and those interactions create together in complicated ways, often taking many years, important societal effects and changes in society. Trying to capture that in one term, we do by calling it impact. But impact is a term in the context of the assessment system. In society, impact doesn't exist. So what does it mean? It means that we construct an assessment term to try to capture this variety of complex interactions, and we call it impact. This is the reason why it's important to not try to find the indicator for impact. Because if the concept itself doesn't exist, one indicator to measure it doesn't exist either. The trick is to try to make translations from the process of knowledge creation to the process of science assessment in such a way that it doesn't hinder the further development of knowledge creation, so that it promotes the creation of more diversified and socially accountable research, rather than hindering by forcing everybody into a straitjacket of impact assessment. So this is a bit of a warning. Maybe I'm boring you. You think, oh, this guy is completely crazy. That's fine with me. But I think this is important to realize that we have, if we put in place research assessment systems, we do something very important. Because we create a reflexive management layer on top of research. And therefore it's important that this reflexive layer is accountable and responsible to the research it's measuring, and not the other way around. But of course the problem we have that in institutions the power relations are the other way around. So we need to empower the individual researchers in order to be able to steer to create an assessment system which is in the long run profitable for everybody. Okay, this also means that we need to be careful with university rankings, and this is the reason why from Leiden and colleagues we try to publish a couple of principles for responsible design of university rankings and also for their interpretation. How do we interpret university rankings? What do we do when our university slides down because 10 other Chinese universities are coming up? How do we also use those university rankings? So you can find these principles. I don't have time to delve into each of them. You can find them on our blog posts at the Center in Leiden, but also in international publications. And I think a lot of you are already interacting with these principles of university rankings. And of course, an important development in research is also the European drive to open science. And I know that a number of your researchers and managers are also quite busy with open science. How can this promote a more open scientific system, which is also more accountable to society at large? And at the moment we are in the context of a number of expert groups busy in Europe to develop recommendations for metrics that help to develop open science as a practice without, of course, creating just a new accounting system that everybody also needs to jump through another set of new hoops and without actually changing the underlying research process. In terms of open science, I would like to ask your attention to the level of ambition that we have with open science, because very often it's also a concept, it's like these policy concepts that start to live a life of their own. What do we actually mean when we talk about open science? So very often it's actually about a more comprehensive measurement of traditional scientific publications. So for example, Mendeley is an example of that. It's very useful, but it's actually quite low level of ambition. And then of course we have the necessity to recognize that actually researchers are doing much more than produce formal publications. They produce software, they create all sorts of other stuff, they write blogs. So recognize and capture the diversity of scientific output is actually what you could call the second level of ambition for open science. And then of course open access is one step higher. We want to open up the whole scientific publication system, especially important for the global south that doesn't always have the money to pay for these very expensive journals or big deals. It's also an idea to open up the scientific communication system to make it more interactive. But of course this is still based on a model in which the scientific system itself is semi-closed, still run by a professional elite, which itself is not always accountable to society as a whole. So this is actually what we could call participatory science. It will have very different forms in different disciplines, but I think this is the highest ambition we may have with open science, to open up the very core of knowledge creation process and to recognize that researchers who are creating new knowledge are themselves always inevitably embedded in society. They are already there. We don't need to make a link between science and society because science outside of society doesn't exist. The trick is to create a scientific system in which professional criteria and professional routines are important, but are not used to close it off. So this is sometimes not so easy, but and here we will be doing quite a lot of work in the next few years to try to help develop this highest ambition for open science. Let me quickly go. I'm not sure how much time I have because in my enthusiasm, I tend to forget the time, and but you can, at some point you just say, "Hey, stop." The master of the conference will tell me when to stop. So at Leiden we are involved in quite a lot of evaluation, because that's more or less half of our work is actually doing contract research to support research assessment and evaluation all over the world, from America to the Middle East to Asia to Scandinavia, Europe, and of course also in our own little country, the Netherlands. And we are not satisfied with the current state of affairs. We think there is a lack of creativity in the field of research assessment. So we try to develop a number of experiments, and you should understand this is from the context of a country with a very well-designed national evaluation system. Actually, there is not much wrong with the protocol of the Dutch standard evaluation protocol, except that it's a protocol. And that's, of course, the problem. We need more interesting practices. And one experiment is explained in this article in Nature by Rinse Benedictus, one of my PhD students, and Frank Miedema, the Dean of the Medical Faculty at the University of Utrecht, where they try to get away from the dominance of a few select numbers, like the Hirsch index and the journal impact factor, and create, in an experimental way, new evaluation practices in which also professors and research groups who mainly want to translate existing scientific knowledge to new medical practices are rewarded, where a bigger variety of intellectual and social goals can be translated and made visible in the evaluation system. So that's why the headline is Fewer Numbers, Better Science. We support this as CWTS by supporting it politically, by enabling and helping them also with the fewer numbers to make the numbers better, but also by having a couple of ethnographers, anthropologists, you could say, who study the process of this experiment in the hospital and who study how this interacts with the existing intellectual traditions in different subfields in medicine. So this is really a big experiment in which a whole hospital tries to reinvent its assessment processes in order to create a better medical research base and a better health care system. A second experiment we are developing over a couple of years, and we will put more energy into this with new projects, is based on a European project with 11 partners in which we participated, and it's called the Acumen Portfolio. This is aimed at creating better tools for the evaluation of individual researchers. Because one of the problems in the research assessment system is that indicators that are quite useful at the national level trickle down, are translated without much ado into performance measurements for individual researchers. And this is really very problematic. So what we want to do is to turn the tables a bit and to make the Acumen Portfolio an instrument that helps the individual researcher to have a bigger voice in this assessment process, which often takes place annually, but also in job applications and in funding decisions. We want to have the evaluation shift from a measurement of what you have done in an accountable mode to a dialogue about the future of the career of the individual researcher. And we think that the narrative of the researcher, so the career narrative, you could say, what does somebody want to reach, what have they done, what is the variety of skills, strengths and weaknesses that together make a person unique. how can you support that development of a career with evidence, both in terms of expertise, output, and influence. And we have produced this report is available on the European Union website. We have also produced evaluation guidelines to help the evaluator to understand which indicators make sense or which don't at the level of the individual researcher. And this will be further developed in the next few years. And as I said, it's aimed at empowering researchers in the process of evaluation. It is aimed at being useful for all academic disciplines, no matter what kind of output or culture they have. Also suitable for all sorts of other uses, and we want it to be able to link into different evaluation systems. Speaking about societal impact of research, we think that it's important that we move away from the idea to measure the impact of research into mapping the interactions between research and society. We have developed a pretty systematic methodology to do this based on the French actor network theory approach, in which the translation of knowledge into other domains is central. So it's an interesting approach because it combines quantitative mapping of science with qualitative conceptual mapping of interactions. It's possible to compare different fields across each other, and the whole system is aimed at, and this is something I will come back in the last slide, which I am approaching quickly, on what you could call collective learning. So we think that if you are in an evaluation process, it is interesting to understand the interactions that your own research results and your own researchers are actually engaged in. And often it's not so easy to see from the perspective of the individual researcher. You need really a kind of exercise like mapping research interactions to do this. And we have also been inspired by the work by Ismail Raffles, who has also shown in a number of articles how interesting interactions between research and society are taking place, for example, also in the healthcare business and in the global south. So science that is applied is often actually science that is engaging in a translation process, which also changes the field itself. So it's not just a matter of application, it's not one direction, it's a mutual interactive process. So this is an example of the software we use, so you can have really beautiful maps, and this is helpful because it also turns the evidence we have, also the qualitative and the quantitative evidence, in what you could say robust forms that can travel in policy circles. Because in policy and if you're responsible for the management of a university, you just can't have vague stories. I mean, you won't get very far in the negotiations with your government about money if you just have vague stories. But the problem, of course, is that the most interesting stuff is vague. So what do we have to do? We have to create presentations and forms of evidence that are robust, systematic, and at the same time are able to capture important elements of the most interesting features of scientific research. So that's always the challenge in creating evidence that can travel and that can make research a better place. An example that we did develop together with the Technical University of Delft is the IDA project, which is an example. I thought I should have at least one concrete example where the university, together with us, combined all their databases they have, so Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar, all sorts of disciplinary databases, the data they have about their personnel, and created an online instrument for all researchers in Delft to see where they were on the map of science and how they compare with, for example, competing technical universities in their field. And this, for example, is an impression of a publication that created a number of tweets, where they were, how they relate to other research, and basically it created this combination of an online interface with all these databases, with the VOS viewer, with our visualization tool, and all these data created an instrument not for evaluation, but for monitoring and making visible the interactions that the university is already engaged in. And it was really immensely successful, a bit to our surprise. It spawned more than 50 case studies in which individual researchers at the Technical University of Delft could use this in an advanced way, and thereby show that you can use bibliometrics and informatics and computer science and something like evaluation science in a way that actually is also surprising and creating new knowledge for the principal investigators in these different groups. So that was actually quite, and I think that for me this is very inspiring, because it shows that it makes it possible for this kind of work to be incorporated as a tool for scientific researchers to create knowledge in a more systematic and more advanced way, in the way we also currently live in our digital society. And this is my last slide. So, I apologize if this was all a bit too theoretical or abstract. So we think that we should coin a new term, and we are still grasping about this. And I promised Sarah de Rijke, who is who is deputy director together with Ludo Waldman of our center and one of the leading people doing the ethnographic research at our center, that I would test this out. So we think that the concept could be evaluative inquiry. So an evaluation is not a measurement of what you have done for the accountant, so to say, but it's an inquiry about the possibilities that you have given the state of affairs that you have in your group or in your university at the moment. Where are the moments where are the points of where you want to invest? What kind of new people do you need? What do you need to perhaps turn down a bit, so make it less a priority? So what does it mean? An evaluative inquiry is tailor-made and modular. It's never rigid, it's never uniform for all fields. It's content-oriented, so the content of the work and the skills of the people in the group are central, and the goal is to collectively learn from the evaluation exercise, and it should always be a mixed methods approach, never only qualitative or only quantitative. Never only peer review without checking whether there is not a bias in the peer review system. Never only based on metrics like the Hirsch index or number of publications or number of the amount of money you collected. Always a mixed methods approach. What should it make visible? The mission and the research topics that are central, they should be leading. Communication and collaboration patterns can be quite interesting, often ignored in evaluation exercises, but it's quite important to understand what you're doing and where you are. It should take into account and make visible all types of outputs and results, also non-traditional, especially I would say non-traditional forms. It should also make visible, and this is something which is, for example, famously ignored, even in the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, the conditions for research and the infrastructure. I think the conditions also means the effective state of affairs in your group. Are your people happy? Do they have a synergetic and collaborative work sphere? Or is it more dominated by a male macho who has a lot of publications and is able thereby to intimidate his younger colleagues? I mean, this happens a lot in universities. And I think this is something that should be, and sometimes the performance culture that has been created promotes misbehavior and the misuse of power by famous researchers. And we should fight that. Conditions for research and infrastructure include a diverse and good work culture. And last point, of course, process determinants like gender diversity. And we hope in the next few years that we will be able to develop this approach in more variety of ways, and we hope that it will help also to spread to spread assessment and evaluation practices that are a happy part of the research process and not something which is the enemy. And I certainly hope that we will be able to learn a lot from your experiences in Catalonia in this respect. And so I'm looking forward to a continued conversation also after today. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. You're an amazing audience. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Wouters, for your enlightening talk. And are there any questions for Dr. Wouters? We have a couple of colleagues of us, Antonio Dols or Aida Puliadan, that will give you the micro. And if you do, please introduce yourself and go ahead. We have just 4 minutes.
Hi, I'm Mary from the CRG in Barcelona. And I have 2 questions. One is, what do you think about the possibility of research institutes being included in the Leiden ranking that's online at the moment? Is that a possibility? And the other one is, you mentioned there are groups working on recommendations for metrics. When do you think there will be guidance on that? Is that something that's coming soon generally for research institutes? In terms of, what kinds of new indicators and new evaluation metrics will be available? Is that something we're talking about very far in the future, or because at the moment we're still using the impact factor, we're still continuing with the same processes?
Okay, so the first question, if I understood it correctly, is whether we should not include independent research institutes in the Leiden ranking, because currently we are basically summarizing everything to the university. If institutes are part of a university, they will inform the position of that university on the Leiden ranking and not. Yeah, we talked about that a lot, partly inspired by the Spanish ranking, which does include research institutes separately. But it's very difficult to compare that. So at the moment we are not inclined to do that. It's an enormous amount of work to produce a ranking like that. It's really difficult to compare independent research institutes like the Max Planck system, for example, with universities. So far we have abstained from it. Actually, we have discussed whether we shouldn't change the name of the Leiden ranking, because actually, it's actually not a ranking, it's the possibility to rank according to different criteria, and you can change the ranking based on your own criteria and then see what comes out. So far we have not decided to change the name, because it would put us out of the game of ranking, and it would mean that we would no longer be the critical voice among the ranking producers. So this is, it's a bit of a... But we have also, every year we discuss, shouldn't we include the research institute? So if you have more reasons that we should do this, I would like to hear. The second point, no, I'm really... new indicators are being created all the time, of course, but very often by people who can play with data and don't really think about the consequences. I'm now chairing a European Union expert group which will produce a report at the end of the year about indicators for open science. And we think that there is actually already, but maybe Gunnar will talk about that, a lot of data available increasingly that can be turned into an indicator. But we are reluctant to put too much emphasis on the creation of new indicators at the moment, because they very quickly start to lead a life of their own. So we would first like to first put firmly in place evaluation frameworks that would prevent the running wild of indicators. So that's currently our attention, but at some point, of course, we will construct new indicators as well. Yeah, I hope this is a bit an answer to your question, because both are very good.
Good morning. My name is Eduard Aiber from the Open University of Catalonia. I'm a sociologist of science, so I know you very well, and I fully agree with your talk. But I wanted to ask you one very specific question. One of the criticisms that are usually made to standard evaluation procedures of research is that the amount of time researchers had to devote to processes of evaluation has increased a lot in the last years. It has been even measured, but some papers, as you know. And my question is, if you show this kind of new model standard for future non-standard evaluations to most researchers, the first things they are going to think is, this means we are going to leave all time in kind of research procedures. When is research going to be made?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course that is indeed the risk, not only of our experiments, but also of all increasingly sophisticated evaluation processes. So the problem is a bit of almost a prisoner's dilemma, almost, not happily, not, where if you want to improve the system because it's too unsophisticated or it only measures for example, the impact factor of the journal in which you're publishing, then it's too crude. It's clearly unfair to a lot of researchers, so you start to improve it. But as soon as you start to improve it, it takes more time. Everybody has to correct it. Everybody, in the end, you're all, accounting. You're all an accountant. So that's what we don't want. I think the solution here is, and we have convinced, for example, the Dutch theologians to play with this, and if you can convince theology researchers, it's not so bad, I think. The trick is here that actually you are taking away part of the time in the evaluation exercise because it becomes a meaningful exercise in terms of your own research. So basically you are pushing back the amount of time purely on management and evaluation and assessment, and you are incorporating part of that process into your domain of research. So basically time spent on research. Of course, it would be meta time in the sense that it is time spent on thinking about your research. But very often this can be very helpful to create new ideas, radically new innovative ideas in your field. So that will be the challenge, and this is my answer, because I totally agree with you that we should push back the amount of time that basically is overhead and not actually the primary process.
And one last question over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great talk. My name is Fernando Fernandez from the University Hospital of Belviche, also working as cyber group, which is Research Excellence Network. As editor of a journal from Wiley, for instance, we are concerned about the issues you were addressing. So not only production is going to be, and performance is going to be measured from number of articles that are going to be produced, and of course it's tricky, as you were mentioning. So we are introducing other factors, for instance, but might be tricky in a couple of years if we think in altimetrics, if you think also in social media. I mean, so when, for instance, also other criteria, if we are going to introduce, because you were talking about open access, may need to be an open discussion with editorials. They may need to reduce the budget for that. Otherwise, the rich and the poor countries, they are going to be really more split, one from the other. Why not also including one criteria in this criteria that you are using, for instance, those researchers who are doing more with less funding, and then the production is really, really high?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's basically about how important is the efficiency of the scientific system. So, for example, Abramo, a very nice colleague from Italy, thinks that we should develop, that bibliometricians should develop indicators of efficiency by basically coupling output to input. I think it's an important problem, but I don't see it as the dominant problem, because the effectiveness of the scientific system, I think, is, at least in most countries, I'm not sure what the situation is in Catalonia or in Spain as a whole, about the efficiency. I do agree that, for example, in the Italian system, this may be a problem. And in general, in universities where professors have been appointed mostly by political processes, it could be a good weapon against old boys networks. And I'm in favor of every instrument against old boys networks that we can have. But it would not be the priority in all countries. So, for example, Norway, the Netherlands, I think those systems are already pretty efficient in many ways. But yeah, I think it varies. But it's an important deficiency in the indicators, I agree with that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions. Thank you. Okay.